Hello everybody and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review we're going to be doing something which I've been meaning to do for quite a long time, and that is finally finish off Doctor Who Stranded. Having previously reviewed volumes 1 and 2 on release, I do believe in 2020 and 2021, I ended up very busy and then not finding time to finish this series, and then I decided to binge listen to the entire series all the way from the very beginning, all again, and now I'm finally up to the point where I can review Stranded 3. This release is available to order now on the Big Finish website, and it is available in a number of different formats, including digital download and physical CD. It can also be purchased as part of a bundle alongside the other Stranded releases, and as always with this series, Stranded isn't one of those series where you can simply cherry pick different releases depending on characters and stuff like that. This is a series which you must really experience as an entire package from volumes 1 all the way through to 4. And it is a very different series to usual, as we do of course see the TARDIS team with a rather dysfunctional TARDIS and a house of occupying residents in Baker Street, London during 2020. So as always with this series, we do have a thread plot arc kind of interwoven throughout all 4 episodes, which again continues from where we left off within Stranded Volume 2. So without further ado, let's find out what happens next. Patience opens the 3rd volume of Stranded, and this time we are stranded in a different sense. The team find themselves on an alien world on the run. They don't know who from, and they don't know how they got there, or even where the Doctor is. This story is one of interesting pairings, seeing Liv and Andy together, and then Helen and Tanya. I'm really starting to like this TARDIS team working together. So far each story has made sure we aren't leaving characters behind. Each instalment is well written to dedicating at least some time to each character, making them all engaging and a comforting familiar voice to listen to. I think that this allocation of character time does slightly start to reduce as we head into the final half of this series. I think that especially the opening 2 box sets have a lot more dedicated episode time to certain specific characters, which is a little bit of a shame, but again is naturally kind of expected as we head towards the later half of the series, which naturally the plot arc and the main theme of the saga overall is going to become more and more relevant. But within this story, I think still that representation of the different characters is still very strong. I think it was at this point within my listening experience first time round where I realised I wasn't able to fully appreciate the plot overall for this series due to the way that the box sets were being released on an annual basis, and come the next volume I was forgetting the main plot details that happened within the previous set, which would then go on to influence the current volume that I was listening to. So it was at this point that I actually stopped listening to Stranded, I do believe halfway through volume 3, when I decided to go back to the very beginning when I had more time. That absolutely benefited my listening experience. I highly recommend it because it made me appreciate the whole narrative so much more. So for that reason, I do definitely recommend listening to Stranded over a short space of time with all 4 volumes, especially between volumes 3 and 4, as you really get that sense of growing momentum. The alien world is very unusual. The inhabitants are gone and all that remains is memories of a once thriving civilization. It's quite a mysterious story for both the listener and the characters, with glimpses into scenes that technically haven't happened. It's also rather disorientating, but all comes together in the final act, so do definitely bear with it. Paul McGann has a rather unique role within this story, telling the story of Lady Patience to the listener. It's kind of a monologue and it is read in a really soothing manner, as always, because it's Paul McGann and his voice is really soothing. Is essentially the spine of the story and links all of the episode together very well. It's very much a metaphor for the narrative, but it's also considerably poetic. I think that these scenes really capture McGann's talents, keeping the listener hooked on his word and message within the tale, but also perhaps showing how the 8th Doctor hides a lot of what he's actually thinking. He rarely truly lets his companions in. He's a rather closed Doctor with a lot going on, I think, internally. The Judoon are also a great touch. We get a little bit more context about their race itself beyond being space police, which I thought was really nice, and Patience continues to present some great character references to other Big Finish outings, which were a great nod with references to the likes of the Robots spin-off series, which I absolutely adore, and if you've not checked that out yet, I definitely recommend doing so. It's without a doubt one of the strongest and most consistent series that Big Finish are currently producing, and we even have references in this episode to Torchwood as well, which is also really nice. It's funny actually that I mentioned the Robot spin-off series because I think especially from listening to Stranded alongside the Robots simultaneously, it has made me appreciate Liv a lot more as a character, and again in the likes of say Ravenous and Doom Coalition, I think that the plot can often kind of take prominence over character development and we don't really get too much time to focus on the actual personalities of these characters and getting to know them, but I think the Robots series and Stranded has definitely aided Liv to become more interesting as a person, as well as become a lot more relatable. I think that Patience showcases the advantages of the box set format. We get a rather different, unusual opener focused on character and mystery, rather than a big baddie or invasion piece. It's also a great hint to the continuing themes of this series and the overall arc, where time is kind of on the wrong track. If you like the recurring characters and exploring their lives, I think that this will be another enjoyable listen. I imagine for those of you who weren't really a fan of the whole style of the Stranded series, I imagine you've probably stopped purchasing the box sets by this point. I think that is kind of one of the benefits of Big Finish. You can purchase a box set and listen to it, and providing that you've bought the physical CD, if you're not really a fan of it, then you could just sell it on ultimately to a Big Finish listener who may absolutely adore it. It's kind of the communal spirit of no matter what, if you purchase a release, someone out there will. The second episode of the box set is Twisted Folklore, and this starts to ramp up the tensions overall for the arc of this series, as the Doctor, Liv and Helen and Tanya are separated on the planet of Rakelia, the origin of the race as seen within the end of Volume 1. As the Doctor attempts to figure out how and why their society has changed so drastically in this new timeline, seeing the regulars adopt new ways of life to fit this rather strict world. This story continues the theme of feeling very on the run as the main leads try not to give away their true selves. I love how Liv adapts to becoming a teacher, preaching stories, whilst Helen becomes a book promoter for the Book of the Doctor, and Tanya becomes a part of the local authority tracking down traitors. I think that Twisted Folklore is a good example of how grand a story can feel within the 8th Doctor series. Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition and Ravenous are all these very big sci-fi stories that I think have a very complex plot, which can very easily daunt the listener. I think that I was definitely very daunted by the likes of Doom Coalition and Ravenous, and more than often you did need to keep a little bit of a graph as to what's going on and what character was who, especially with multiple regenerations. This series is complex in a different sense. It focuses on cause and effect, and the fact that you can listen to it in isolation with the absence of what happened before within the 8th Doctor era definitely works in this series' benefit. This is the first story, I think, where we get to experience the full impact of divine intervention's take over the universe, scaring the children into submission through the use of stories intertwined in their past to obscure the truth and change their culture. How this is also intertwined so effortlessly into the Rakelian society is rather chilling, because it is everything this society is new and they should kind of live in fear of what is beyond, and that is solely down to divine intervention's actions. Much like episode 1, the theme of power and words and stories seems to be a rather poignant note that ties all of these stories together neatly. The episode also uses enforcement and body horror in a rather horrific way. The companions are placed in some rather difficult emotional situations, which tests their strength, and now that I've listened to this series altogether, my appreciation for this story has definitely grown, as I can recall feeling rather lost the first time round when listening to this story, due to me being unable to link this episode back to the events of Volume 1. Ultimately, this episode seems to have a much bigger importance when you almost have the whole plot arc for the series within your mind. The stakes of this episode do feel rather high, and it's one of those stories where I did feel really immersed in what's going on. There's that sense of fear being caught trying to spread what is essentially the truth, and then you have Liv and Tanya struggling due to them being separated, having very different jobs and roles within the society. It definitely challenges all of our companions in a rather unusual way that again we've not seen so far this series due to us being mostly stranded on Earth. This applies all of that within an alien setting. All of the characters are trying to keep a low profile while simultaneously pushing the Doctor's narrative, and it's little moments the likes of seeing Liv and Tanya communicating via some rather rough old technology, which is rather an important note within their relationship because we start to see them actually miss each other due to them being apart. Overall, for Twisted Folklore, I think that this episode is most certainly one of the more plot arc heavy narratives so far within this quadrilogy series, and now that we're into Volume 3, I suppose that this is generally natural for the series overall to progress. Upon reflection, I think this is the point within the series that we start to see some of the reoccurring characters of Baker Street starting to take a little bit of a back seat. The likes of Tony and Ron and the Akhtar sisters, they don't really get too much to do from this point onwards because they're not a part of the central TARDIS team. They're naturally an important part of the series overall because they do occupy Baker Street, so we do see them again, although they're not really as important to drive the narrative forwards, which if you're someone who really enjoyed box sets 1 and 2, I think that this may come a little bit of a disappointment. I know personally for me, especially throughout Volume 3 and 4, I was really hoping to see more of Tony and Ron. Perhaps there was difficulties in production, perhaps the remote recording nature of these later box sets as well might have put a little bit of a spanner in the works. I just thought that we may have seen a little bit more of them before the overall conclusion of this series, which, as I say, is maybe a minor criticism. However, it doesn't overall detract from the actual plot of the series. I think if anything from this point onwards, the cast starts to get almost a little bit streamlined. So now we move on to the third episode of the set, which is entitled Snow, and this takes the Stranded series back to the familiar territory as the TARDIS once more arrives on Baker Street, but this time in 2035. It's clear that time is continuing to unravel, so this story delivers the effects of this new timeline with divine intervention in charge. At the end of Volume 2, we get a glimpse into this seemingly fascist future, but this time the episode takes a more personal tone. Time has moved on, and Ron is living in Baker Street alone, except Baker Street has the rather unusual incentive of being the only place in the world that snows. One thing I've noticed throughout these later stories is closer bonds are starting to form between the main characters, in particular the Doctor and Helen. Despite the fact that Helen clearly gets frustrated over the Doctor's lacking consideration of others sometimes, I think that generally their bond is starting to become a little bit more natural and digs a bit more personally into the lives of both characters rather than being a surface level Doctor-companion relationship, which I think definitely some of her early adventures sadly do seem to be a little bit like that, where we don't really get to see much of them talking just by themselves. One of the big challenges of this era is that the whole problem is continuing to really take its toll on the Doctor as a person. He's becoming more irritable, less understanding of people, and he isn't that happy, excitable Doctor seen in the likes of the early Lucy Miller adventures or the Charlie Pollard stories. Andy is back for this episode too, and I must admit he does feel like a little bit of a spare part throughout this story. He doesn't particularly fit within the team's structure, as Liv as Tanya, Helen stays with the Doctor, but what he does provide is that occasional line of wisdom which helps the characters through some rather difficult situations, but he's not the most understanding. He helps kind of in his own way. But what is nice to see within Stranded 4 in particular is that we do start to see Andy becoming a more integral role within this Baker Street team, and if anything he's actually gained some rather sort of emotional bonds with these regular characters, and if anything, he kind of has more of a family with this TARDIS team than he does with actual Torchwood. He is a rather important part of this relationship, and people are relying on him and wanting to know where he is and seeing how he is and checking up on him, which is not particularly the warm reception that he gets within the Torchwood stories. I think that Andy is definitely very much left to his own devices, so I think it is nice to see Andy actually find his own wings, I suppose, in this series and become a companion of the Doctor, but also have some benefits from that as well, which helps him grow as a person. I've been listening to Torchwood Aliens Among Us recently, and I'm adding this in as a little bit of a footnote because Andy really does go through hell throughout that series at a number of points, so it's nice that he's found himself a little family that are somewhat more safe than Torchwood. This story also returns to the style seen within the early volumes within this series. It's got the occasional bit of action in there, but it's mostly created by the time period that they've found themselves within, rather than the likes of an alien foe. There isn't really many aliens throughout the entirety of Stranded, and that makes it really different and quite exciting. This story does present the struggles of Liv and Tanya's relationship in great detail. Nicola Walker provides what is possibly one of her most vulnerable performances to date as Liv, and much like the Doctor, she's struggling with the environment of this series, but perhaps it's also a learning curve for Liv as she starts to experience time almost like the Doctor does, possibly giving her an answer as to why he is always moving and always progressing forward and never quite getting attached. As we are now starting to head towards the end of Stranded, I'm starting to wonder if some of the Doctor's friends are maybe perhaps considering parting ways. I did enjoy this story, and I think it was actually quite a heavy one with lots of human life at the focus. It's one of those novelties of this series compared to other Doctor Who eras, and for that reason it does feel rather new series in its design. And as we now head towards the final episode within Volume 3, I do get that sense of uncertainty as to where this series is venturing to next within Volume 4. I think that the fourth volume of a series, especially within the 8th Doctor Adventures, is always rather scary for a listener because you want the team to do a good job, you want them to be able to finish the story in a satisfying way, but at the same time that is a very difficult task. Stranded Volume 3 concludes with what just happened, and funnily enough, the title of this story was exactly what I was thinking when I was listening to this episode first time round, as it's an episode in reverse chronology. I love the way that John Dorney continues to develop his writing style with Big Finish. I think Stranded has really allowed these writers to do something different, with none of the episodes feeling like a fully normal Doctor Who adventure. Personally, I find this style of story incredibly refreshing after the previous Grand Eighth Doctor sci-fi epics, which did normally use the same style of trope. It's nice to have a series that is so starkly different. So basically, this episode is told backwards and focuses on decisions and choices made within the previous scene, or the next scene from the perspective of the listener. This episode picks up some of the series' previous plot elements, including the universe rapidly changing into this new weird timeline, but also in particular the events that started within the second volume, seeing the TARDIS team explore an absolutely obliterated planet Earth in the far, far future. And that was of course the very first episode of Volume 2. So again, we're getting that sense of this series being an overall package of adventures rather than 4 box sets of standalone stories. It does take quite a while to get used to, and I think the first 15 minutes or so may benefit from a second listen once you've fully familiarised yourself with the style of this story, as the first 15 minutes are also essentially the cliffhanger of this series, so are rather crucial moving forward, which is very unusual, but it's quite cool. I think that once the way that this story is delivered has settled within your mind, I think the style works very well, and it's a perfect presentation of how the Doctor's plans can change along the way. With a mysterious leader of divine intervention to find, the Doctor and friends want to find out how humanity is completely wiped out in the space of one moment. It's also nice seeing this TARDIS team once more return to a rather spacey territory, as it shows how far the main protagonists have come. Helen and the Doctor in particular have a great dynamic, and Liv and Tanya have really blossomed into this lovely relationship, which has seen Liv go to a new level of being a companion with the Doctor, but also having ties to somebody else, which is quite nice. I also do like the way that this episode explores the character of Andy. He has a great warmth and provides some nice moments between himself, Liv and the Doctor in particular. He certainly feels more a part of this story than he did within the previous one. And as we are now at the end of the third volume within this series, it does acknowledge some of the main plot threads of the series overall, as we start to hear why events of this box set have unfolded in the way that they have. But much like the previous box sets in Stranded, I don't feel like this story is insanely complex to the extent that it daunts the listener. Yes, I am giving you a side-eye Doom Coalition. I think that this series is much more manageable. Despite the fact that it is backwards, what just happened is a rather easy one to follow, and if anything actually kept me more hooked compared to a regular narrative, as it makes the listener really think as to why and how things are unfolding the way that they are. Dorney has attempted something different to the usual action-packed space adventure, so I definitely respect that. Admittedly, if this episode was told in the usual way, it might be regarded as a rather normal, sort of average sci-fi story, but the way that it has been delivered makes it more exciting. And naturally, of course, due to this episode being the concluding one of the set, it does leave lots of great threads to pick up as we venture into Stranded's final chapter of adventure. Plot threads of which that I'm trying my very best to leave out of these reviews, but overall I think things are coming together nicely. But can Volume 4 deliver? So there we have it, that concludes my review of Doctor Who The 8th Doctor Adventures Stranded 3. It has been a little bit of a longer review to usual, partly because I've wanted to discuss my own sort of emotions and reaction to the episodes, while simultaneously at the same time remaining kind of ambiguous as to the actual plot threads, because I especially think at this point within the series, the plot arc is becoming so prominent to the adventure, it is starting to make the episodes difficult to talk about, while still keeping the review somewhat spoiler free. I think that in particular towards the later half of this box set, especially episode 4, does a great job of delivering an episode that shows Andy's importance within this TARDIS team, but also at the same time delivering some lovely moments between the main protagonists, Liv, the Doctor, Helen, but also Tanya as well, and it's really making me think about how this series is going to shape up and what is going to be the implications of these adventures. I think that Volume 4 has a lot to live up to, so let's see what the next one delivers. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular Doctor Who content. Have a nice day. I shall see you all next time.